Hey everyone, and welcome to part 2 of the Deep Dive series. We are analyzing Illumination by Marty Friedman. Part 1 was about harmony, part 2 here will be about melody, and the part 3 will be about technique. Now in this melody section, we're going to look at the function of the notes, basically. Of course, there is more magic to stuff, but this is a way to help us understand a little about what is going on and maybe a little how Marty himself approaches stuff when he's making music. And also in general, these are some stuff that you can maybe relate to when you're making your own melodies, playing solos, stuff like that. And I have a cup of coffee here, so I am doing good. First, I want to show you the way that we're going to analyze stuff here. And that will be kind of building on the way that we looked at harmony before. Remember how we did look at the E major scale like this? So, we looked at the major scale like this, right? And we gave them names. Let's give them all the names here. Right, so since we're in E major, it's going to be these notes. Now, the same way that in the harmony section, I categorized building chords into 3 different ways. Well, I'm going to do the same thing here with the melody. And we can analyze the melody and we can approach playing melody in 3 different ways. Now, I know that it's an oversimplification and this is a very deep subject, but I think that's a helpful way of looking at it and starting to understand what is going on. All right. So the very first way of analyzing melody, building a melody, however you want to call it, is by using the notes in the major scale. Right? So all of this is fair game. Every single note. Right? And that's the way most of us start learning this stuff. Right? That's the way most of us start playing solos. We take a scale that fits the whole thing. In this case, the song is in E major, so we use an E major scale. We take it and play over the whole thing, right? That's a fine way. It all works. Nothing wrong with that. Now, that's the first way of approaching melody. That's sometimes called a horizontal way, because it's something that you can take over the whole thing and just kind of surf all over the place, you know, and it all works, right? And it works fine. So it's sometimes called a horizontal way because of that. That is also called diatonic. Diatonic means staying within a parent scale. And the parent scale in this case is the E major. Now the second way is not so much thinking about E major all the time, but more being in tune with the chords that are going on. Meaning, for instance, that when there's, say, a chord built on a 3, which would be this, right? That means that we're aware of the notes that fit with the 3, which primarily would mean these notes, these 3, right? But being aware of what every note feels like and sounds like against this chord right here, right? That's why this is sometimes referred to as a vertical approach. Makes sense, because when we're on the 3, we're really zoning in on that 3, and then when the chord changes to, say, like a 5, then we really zone in on what the 5 sounds and feels like, and what everything feels like against it. Right? Now here's another thing. Since, for instance, when we start on the 1, as you can see, this chord has a 1, 3, 5. These are the primary notes of a triad, which is a 3-note chord, right? However, we can mark it down like this as well, using this kind of vertical approach more. So it has the 1, 3, 5, right? It's the same notes. But here's the thing. We can do the same to this chord. We can do the same to this chord. And as you can imagine, we can do the same thing on every single chord. For instance, on the F sharp, yes, these are the same notes here that are going on. Right? These are the same notes here. That's not going to change. However, the way we analyze them is a bit different, meaning that we're not always just looking at the E major, like we're playing the 2, we're playing the 6. No, we're looking at it from the point of view of the chord that we're playing. Which means that every single chord that we have has its own root, right? This is called a root. Has its own 3rd, and has its own 5th. Now this here is a major chord, so this is a root, a major 3rd, we can just call it 3rd, either way is fine, and a 5th. But for instance, the 3 chord is a minor chord, which means that it still has a root, it still has a 5, however, it has a minor 3rd. Alright? I understand that this is a lot, and feel free to watch this video many times if you feel so. But I just want to put this out there, that this is the approach that Marty is more familiar with than this scalar approach. And as you can see, maybe from here, the difference is that this is a more horizontal approach and it kind of never changes. However, this vertical approach here changes all the time. And it's actually pretty tough to sometimes follow along. If chords change all the time, it's pretty tough to play. But this is what Marty Friedman is very, very good at, right? And this is what, for instance, jazz players work on. This is actually a good thing for everyone to work on, because when you land on notes that are nicely in tune with the chord, meaning that, for instance, when the 3 chord comes along and I play its minor 3rd, it feels good, right? But if I'm just playing an E major scale and a 3 chord comes along and I play this note, I mean, it's in the E major scale and they're both in E major, but this note might not sound all that desirable, right? Alright, so that's the way number 2. The first way is a parent scale sort of way and looking at things from a horizontal perspective. The way number 2 was looking at stuff from a vertical perspective. and approaching each chord separately. Now, the way number 3 is, just as we had chords that are taking us somewhere, we can also have notes that are taking us somewhere, right? We can play notes that on themselves don't sound all that pleasant, right? However, they can add a lot of spice. And if you use them in such a way that they take you to a strong note, they can really spice up your playing and make the chord tones sound even stronger. Makes sense? I'll give you a simple example. For instance, let's just take the 1 chord. Let's put on its 3 and 5 here, right? Now let's say that these are all the notes that we're just aiming for, right? Let's just add a single chromatic note down from below. Now chromatic means only half steps, meaning every single note. So when we chromatically approach a note, it means that we're just playing a note a fret lower. So in this case, if the notes are E, G sharp, and B, we can approach those notes with a D sharp going right to that, with a G going right to that, and with an A sharp going right to that. Right? These notes have varying ways of sounding against the chord. However, the point of them is not to sound like anything on their own. They're taking you somewhere. Right? Now, we can also have a group of notes that are taking us somewhere. For instance, let's just approach this note. Only the 5, right? Let's not worry about anything else. So the 5 happens to be a B in this case. Let's put on a nice little chromatic lift from below. And let's put the same thing from up high, right? These are just notes that are 1 fret apart from this. On their own, they're a bit hairy sounding, right? However, you can make melodic phrases that circle around this note. Alright? And it works just fine. And the reason why it works is because we are going for this note very strongly. Now we can change the approach if we like. A common approach, for instance, is taking a chromatic note from down below. However, having the higher note be diatonic to the key. That's a pretty common approach. Now, diatonic is just a way of saying within the E major scale. It means the same thing. So, a common way of doing chromatic approaches is having a chromatic note from down below and a diatonic note from up above. Either way works fine. You can do both as chromatic notes like this, or you can do it diatonic, meaning staying within the E major scale. Either one works fine. but they have different flavors. And what kind of flavor you're going for, that's your business, right? But that's the way that we're going to analyze this song and Marty's melodic approach. All right, so that's the introduction. Let's get to the song itself. Now, the first phrase, we're in E major, and the chord is an E major, so... Now, this is all very much inside. Oh yeah. All of those notes are just 1, 2, 3, and the 7, meaning the major 7. It's usually said major 7, just to be very clear on that it's the 7th from the major scale. They all fit E major nicely. Now there is, of course, this rub that is from the half step ringing out. But functionally, it all fits, right? And then we go. Now those are both very much chord tones. Right, so the first note is to the C sharp 7, which is the chord that's ringing out. It's the flat 7 of the chord, because the C sharp 7 is a 4-note chord, and it's just hitting the flat 7. Next up, it's an F sharp minor, and this is just a 5 of the chord. All right, next up, that is something that I can imagine only Marty would do in a beautiful ballad setting like this, right? These are all notes that musically, from an analysis point of view, don't really make that much sense. They don't really have that much of a function on their own, right? We're on the C sharp 7, that creates a lot of tension, right? And we're having a flurry of notes that are about to go into a nice chord tone, right? That's almost like this, like a finger exercise. It sounds good, sure, because it's in such a nice context. But there isn't some secret hidden scale in there that we have to learn. That's not how this works. This is a flurry of notes that are used as a launch pad to get into the next part. All right? Now in the next phrase, we're over B7. And we go. I'll take the end part of the phrase and put it on the E string so that we're on kind of the same spot in the fretboard. So it's a bit easier to visualize what's going on. So, the chord is a B7. That would be the arpeggio. And arpeggio means just the notes of the chord played separately. This is a chord. This is an arpeggio. Right? And of course, the same notes can be doubled anywhere. Like you can have 2 notes of the B, for instance. They're the same note, but in a different octave. And what we're doing is we're targeting those notes, right? And we're targeting them from down below, right? This is the target note. That's the chromatic approach note. Same thing here. This is the target note. That's the chromatic note. See how much spice it makes? Right? I can play it to without the spice, so I'll just make the approach note, I'll turn it into a diatonic note, meaning that we're in the E major scale. See how that sounds? Right? There's nothing wrong with that, but the spice is definitely a lot less present. Right? Now here's just the same thing going on, and we're just coming at it from a fret below. And we just have a little melodic phrase. Makes sense, right? That's why all of these notes, that's why all of them can exist within the phrase, but they're not supposed to be like the main tones that we're hitting, right? Makes sense? So all right, next up, the chord is E major, and here we go. So as you might have just witnessed, it's just a little phrase that's all inside the E major, right? And then we just go up chromatically. Now I'm taking the bends out so that it's a bit easier to visualize what's going on. But the notes that I'm hitting are the same, right? Alright, so we're going from this note, which is a chord tone, to the E major, and we're going chromatically up all the way to there. Now, this is a D note. It's not in the E major scale, and it's not in the C#7 arpeggio, right? So what is it? Sounds good though, right? Well, this is where we get into a concept called extending chords. What we've been dealing with here are 3-note chords and 4-note chords. However, we can build those chords to be even bigger, and that's what we're doing here. We're adding one more note into the chord that fits the chord really nicely, right? Now this would be called a 9. That's because when you build the chords, you skip one note, go from 1 to 3 to 5 to 7 to 9, right? There's a logic to it. That's why we call it a 9, because of the structure that it's built upon. Sure, you can also find it right here. It's the same note, but the reason we call it 9 is because of that structure, right? Now, that's not all there is to it, because
If we just have a regular 9, it would be this. Right? Maybe you've heard that somewhere. That's a very common extension of a 7th chord, meaning that the chord now becomes a C-sharp 9, right? However, what we can also do with the 9 is we can alter it. We can alter many notes of the chord, but that's one of the more common chord tones that we can alter. We can flatten it, we can sharpen it. They all have their own sounds. But right here, what we're doing is we're flattening it, meaning that it's a flat 9. That's pretty, right? And that's something that we can also use in the chords that are playing in the back if we want to. But what mostly happens in Marty's music is that the chords that are in the back are usually 3-note or 4-note chords, and the extensions can be implied with the melody, right? So in a short form of explaining this, when the C-sharp 7 comes, we're hitting the flat 9. Okay, makes sense. That's why it works so nicely, because Marty is again very aware of what notes feel like against what chord. Let me play the whole phrase. That's the whole phrase. All of those notes fit the C-sharp 7 perfectly. There's a flat 9. Before that is the 1, right? This is the flat 7. And this is the major 3rd. Right? And then we just go. And now we are on the F sharp again. And we're hitting the 5 with the chord. All of that fits F sharp minor nicely, right? Now we're changing the chord to an A minor. And remember, this is the 4 minor. I love the 4 minor. That's one of my favorites. And what we're doing with the 4 minor here is we're hitting the 5 of the chord, and then the 6 of the chord. Right? The 6 is another way of extending the chord. Sometimes it fits really nicely, sometimes it's a bit more hairy sounding. Either way, functionally, it's a-okay. It fits nicely with the 4 minor, right? There are some other places where Marty likes to use it, but we'll get to them as they come. Next up is an E major with a B in the bass, and we're just playing the E major scale. And the last note fits E major just fine. Also happens to be a chord tone of the C diminished. Next up, except for one note, we're all in the E major scale. And the one note is the very bottom note. And here again is a kind of a target note thing where we're hitting the C sharp and the chord is a C sharp. And we're just hitting that a chromatic note from down below. Now I could talk more about how it comes from the harmonic minor and all that stuff, but this is gonna be a long video anyway, so it's a chromatic approach note into the C sharp. And we're landing right on the A. So everything fits nicely with the A minor. That also, which is at the end of the bar, fits very nicely with A minor. Again, I'm taking the bend out so that it's a bit more clearer to see. So everything here is E major, right? The chord again is E major, so it's the E major scale. Up until that. Then is a little chromatic approach note. Right? On the recording, it's... And this note that we land on, again, we're on the D sharp 7. Which is this, and the note is a D sharp. So very much a chord tone. All right, next up, let's look at it chord by chord. The very first chord is a G sharp. And we can look at it from this arpeggio shape. Right? But all we're using is these two, which is the flat 3 and the 5. And we just have a melodic phrase that circles around that. Right? Then the chord changes to a C sharp 7. And we are circling around this note. Right? You could do that with every single note if you like. And it all works, right? Because the melodic phrase takes you so strongly to the chord tone that the ear doesn't really mind all that chromaticism there. That's why actually, for you interested in this, this is a reason why we use things like double sharps in standard notation. Because if you look at the notation part here, the little black dots are going up and down, right? So if I do, they're just going down and down and down. Well, in order to get this note, we're still going down to the next note down below, but we have to sharpen it so that it's the very note that's below this one, right? But we're in a key where we're already sharpening notes. So usually we have an F sharp, but now we have to sharpen even the sharpened note, so it becomes an F double sharp. I know that that is just semantics, that doesn't matter, but if you ever want to know why stuff like double sharps exists, that's one of the reasons. Let me play the phrase for you again, but I'll take the chromatic approach notes out. Right? So chromatic notes can be something that when you first try and do them, they're like, oh, what is that? But once you take them out, you really miss them, right? That is so bland compared to this. The next phrase, we're moving from G sharp minor into an F sharp minor, so it's the exact same thing but 2 frets lower. And then it's just the exact same thing with the B7. So what happens in both of these circling approach things is that the lower note is a chromatic approach and the higher note is diatonic. So this higher note is an A, which fits the E major. And here is the same thing. This one fits the E major. I can play you a version where they're both very chromatic, meaning this and this. There's nothing wrong with that. Works just as fine. It's just a matter of taste, right? So, what happens now is we have the exact same thing with some variation happening, right? But we don't need to analyze that stuff again. All right? So let's get to the next section. Here we have distortion on the guitar. So. Harmonically, this section is a bit different from the last one in that in the last section we had a lot of dominant 7th chords taking us to other places, right? So there was like this momentary tension. Well, this section is a bit different in that this has almost none of that. So all the chords are very much in E major, meaning the E major scale, so they're very diatonic chords. Except for this one. But here again. And so on. Since the chords are very diatonic, the melody is also very diatonic. There isn't really any chromatic spice here, which is what makes a big difference to it compared to the last section. And every time we come to a new chord, we're hitting a very strong chord tone, right? So this is the 5 of the C sharp. This is the 3rd of the A. This is the 5 of the E. This is the 5 of the B, right? This is the 1 of the G sharp minor. This is the 3rd of the C sharp. This is the 3rd of the F sharp. This is the flat 7 of the G sharp 7. And it's also diatonic to E major. Next up, we're hitting the third of the A again. Five of the E. Third of the C sharp. Here is something a bit different. We are in A. What happens here is that we are in the C sharp minor pentatonic. So here's the third of C sharp minor, and then we start to, right? Now we're hitting the sixth of the A major, which is a fine chord, so nothing wrong with that. But a lot of the sound right now that we're in is the pentatonic. This is the 5 of the E. All of this is the pentatonic again. I'll take the bends out. That's all pentatonic. Except this is no more the pentatonic, but it's the 5 of the G sharp minor, right? And all of those notes were diatonic to E major, meaning the E major scale. And this is the third of the C sharp 7. So what is this? We're landing on an F sharp minor. But we're not hitting a chord tone. There are two ways to look at this. The first way is that we're just playing the pentatonic. Which fits nicely, right? We're just having a chromatic approach. Another way to look at it is that we're hitting the extension of the chord. Right? So this would be a 9. If we go up the chord building way. And we can do that even higher to an 11. That's another way of looking at it. I'd rather look at it as a pentatonic right now. To me, that seems to make more sense because that's kind of the world that we've been in for a while now. So it's just more the pentatonic. All right, so here comes this first fast bit. I'm going to put it in a different spot on the neck right now because it might be a bit more clear to see what's going on. Okay, so I'm going to put it here. Okay, so the chord is an F sharp minor, and this is what a very standard F sharp minor arpeggio would look like. Now what we're doing is we're adding one note to it, and that is adding the 9. Remember how we extended the chords, and we can extend it up into the 9. Now that would be called an F sharp minor 9. However, that's not what we're doing here. We're just taking only the 9, right? So it's... Now this is what is called an F sharp minor add 9. All right, so that's the difference. If you ever see a minor 9, it means that all the notes that are built from the chord are there. But if you see what is called an add 9, it can be major, it can be minor. What it means that we're just adding this one note into the 3-note chord, right? Now we can put that note an octave lower. It's the same note, right? So then it becomes this. Adding the 9 is a nice thing to do on a bunch of chords. And you can do it all over the place. So that's what's happening here. It's a way to kind of expand on the arpeggio shape and to get a bit more mileage out. So the entire thing is that's the whole thing. The first part is this. That's how much we're using the F sharp. Now, since the chords are an F sharp minor and after that is an A minor, the notes are just, here's an F sharp and here's an A minor. Now we can just use the same shape on both of them. Right? Makes sense? I'm just taking this shape and sliding up 3 frets. I get to that point and then I slide up. Now that we're in the A minor, we're again extending the chord a little. So we have the add 9 here. We get up to that point just on the A minor triad, and then we just have some notes that fit the chord. And the point is to land on this 6 again. So we're in the A minor, which is the 4 minor, just like before, and again we're landing on the 6. So the 4 higher notes are this. And we just have this note in between. And it fits the chord in the most pleasant way. We could put another note in there, sure. But this might be the best choice here, right? And all we have next is we're bending up into the 6 again. And then we have a little. So we're just circling around the 6. So that's what it looks like without the bends. Now I hope that makes sense in what's going on here. And it's a bit clearer to see with this fingering. Now I put it over here because later on it helps me to get into the chorus a bit better. So when I play it here, it looks like this. Right? It's the same notes. So, next up. Again, it's the same section, right? There are some phrasing variations again, but in terms of analyzing the melody, it's all the same. Yeah. Then again comes this. It's all the same, right? The fingerings are a bit different because that's the way the phrasing sounded to me, but I'm sure that this is the kind of stuff that Marty likes to change around anyways. Next up, same thing again. It's all the same, right? All the same, right? Again, it's all the same, right? Just a little phrasing differences and maybe some notes are repeated, stuff like that. But analytically, it's the same. Now here comes the fast part again. Most of it is the same as before, except that we already slide up. Right? So the shapes are the same. Now here we're just chromatically ascending. Go up to there, and then we take one note below and bend it up. So this is obviously the target note. And this happens to be the major 7 of the A minor, meaning that the implication would be that the chord would be an A minor major 7, which means this. On its own, that's a pretty strange chord, right? However, when we are on the 4 minor, like we are right now, it's a nice sound. So here's one major. Right? So there is a minor major 7. But it sounds beautiful, right? So it's all about context. So we're hitting the major 7. So without the bends, the notes are these. So it's major 7, the root, and the 6. So they all fit the A minor nicely. We just have a little chromatic approach right before, right? So the whole thing. And then we land on a third of the E major, and that takes us to the next section. Again, I'm taking the bends out just for clarity. So we're coming to the G sharp minor with this. And this is a chord tone. In fact, this is the G sharp minor arpeggio. And you guessed it, that is a chord tone of C sharp minor. It's just a C sharp. Next up. This is all very much a C sharp minor pentatonic, or as a lot of you may probably know, it's also the E major pentatonic. It's the same shape. Right? And the note that we land on, this is an F sharp, and since the chord is an F sharp major, it fits perfectly, right? Next up is a D major,
we're doing is we're hanging around the D major shape, which is this. Right? A lot of people like to play the same notes like this. Right? Where you can sweep it more. But that's not the way Marty works. We'll get more of those in the technique part. So that first part, this is a D major 7 arpeggio. Right? Then we're taking the regular major triad arpeggio. So we're mixing and matching. And then we're having this thing. So what is going on? It's a lot of chromatics, right? So the chord is a D major and we're going to an E major. If we just look at the ascending part, then we are taking the first 2 notes of the D major and then all chromatics going up into a B, which is the 5 of the target chord, right? So you could argue that we're already setting up the chord in a way. And the descending part is just, which is a nice chromatic melodic phrase that takes us from here to here. And they're both the chord tones of the E major. If you want to look at it on the same string, that's all we're doing. So now we're in the E. That's very much an E major, right? There's just a 6 here. And then most of this is just an E major scale, except here. And guess what? Again, we're landing nicely on a chord tone. This is the 3rd of the G sharp minor. So again, everything else is E major, nice and diatonic, except we have a little chromatic approach into the chord tone. And then these are all very nice chord tones, right? G sharp is here, the 3rd and 1. And then the C sharp. This is the 3. This is the 1. That could be thought of as a C sharp minor bluesy phrase. A C sharp minor pentatonic, but with the blue note a little in there. Right? Makes sense? Next up is an A major, so we're just starting on the A. And now we're getting these melodic phrases that really target a single chord tone, right? So the target note is this, which is the 5 of the A. and we're circling it around, chromatic from down below and diatonic from up, right? Now the chord is in E major, so on the A it was, then we got an E. So the target notes are these. They're all the same phrase. All we're doing is just changing the place where we do it. All right, next up is this. We're on the F sharp, so we're landing on the major third. The F sharp's right here. So you could think of it as a little bluesy phrase again. But it all fits the F sharp major perfectly, right? You could think of this as a 9 to the F sharp major. And we're just going up to the 3 and back down into the 1. Next up is an A major, so that is all very much A major. I'll show you the A major triad shape first that we're working around with here. So this note is doubled on the strings, right? And all we're doing is we're adding the 9 again, right? Which is, here is 1 and 3, and here's the 9, right? And now we're just putting a diatonic note to the E major in between these chord tones, which is the 3 and the 5, and we're hitting this. So it's all very much an A major. We're adding the 9 and we're adding one diatonic note into it in between the two chord tones, right? Then we're landing on the B. We're using a little sliding and bending, but it's just this, right? And this is the 5 of the B. And then just a little E major run. That's all E major. And now, since the key is about to change, the melody is already taking notes from the F sharp major. That's all F sharp major, right? Next up, the rhythm guitars come on in and do some. There are many harmonies in there, so the melody keeps staying here until we get to the A sharp 7, and then it goes. And it's the third of the A sharp 7. And all of
those just simply nicely fit the A♯7 and take us into the third of the next chord, which is a D# minor. Right? Right, so the phrase is 1, flat 9, 1, flat 7, and go into the third. And that's as much as that section lasts. Next up, we get a clean guitar going. So the whole thing is pretty close to what we did previously, but in a different key. I'll take the bends out again. So it's all pretty diatonic to F#. And again, we're pretty much always landing on chord tones when the chords change. So the first is a D#, it's a third. Next is a B. The chord tone is there. This is a 5. This is a 5 again. So it's the same thing as before. 5 again. 5 again. A third. And this is a flat 7. Now that's as long as we were in that key. Now we're shifting to G major. Right? All chord tones and everything is diatonic. So the same thing again. It's pretty much all pentatonic up until the last note where we hit a new chord tone, which fits the B minor nicely. And here we are going for the third of the E, right as it changes. And then we just go down the E major arpeggio. Next up is kind of the same thing as before, right? So before we had this. Now we're just doing. So the same thing, we're kind of in the pentatonic. Next. That's a lot of stuff, right? Once again, we're on the 4 minor. It's just a different key, so it's a C minor this time. But we're treating it in a similar way. We're just expanding the arpeggio shape again. So before, it was something like this. Where they were all triad notes except for the 9 here. And the 6 over here. And this one over here, which you can also call it an 11. Before, I like to call it just kind of a passing note in between these two chord notes, because it's not that important of a note to analyze. But the note itself is an 11 to the chord. So what we have here, in addition to all of that, is a major 7 over here. And a 9 over here again. Okay, so the entire shape looks like this. Now those are all chord tones of a very extended chord. In fact, it's so extended that you might as well just call it a scale, but it doesn't matter which you call it. If you call that an arpeggio and insist on calling it by its widest name, that would be a C minor major 13 arpeggio, because it has a 1, flat 3, 5, major 7, 9, 11, and a 13. Right? So that's a lot, right? You could also call it a scale, which would be called a melodic minor, because all of the notes are there too. So someone might call this a melodic minor scale shape. Someone might call this a melodic minor arpeggio shape. Someone might call it as a minor major 13 arpeggio shape. It honestly doesn't matter all that much which one of those you call it, because when a chord gets wide and big enough, it's pretty much the same as a scale, and we're talking about the same thing no matter what. So what we're doing is we're playing around with the shape. So first of all, here's a nice minor major 7. Okay, so it's all just a minor triad except for the first note. And then we slide up to the 6. Or in this case, we can also call it a 13. The 6 and the 13 mean the same. The reason why we call it a 13 is because of the exact chord building system of going over every other note. You can call it a 6, you can call it a 13. Either way is fine. Then we use a bit of the 9. Then we go down the shape and back up, right? And the very last note we land on is not a chord tone, but we're hitting the chord tone of the next chord and we are changing keys. So the entire thing is so we're hitting this note and the chord becomes a C sharp minor. So it's the 5 of that chord, right? Next up, and then the guitar takes a harmony. So that's the harmony line, because the string section is taking care of the melody right there. So all of those notes fit right in with the E major scale, and also they fit right in with the melody that the string section is playing. So from there we go into this big bend, right? And we're hitting the F sharp note, which is a third of D sharp minor. Then when we change the note to the next bend, it's a 5 of the C sharp. Okay. Then just some more power chords. And there's the same suspension that I was talking about in the harmony part. Next up comes this arpeggio part, right? That is very much a D sharp minor, right? And then we're landing on a different arpeggio, which is this. This is a B major arpeggio shape, but the chord is a G sharp minor. So how does that work? Well, this is where we get to a concept where we can have different triads over a single chord, and they all fit. And how you get those different triads is that you can start them on a note of the chord. Because the first thing we always do is we start on the 1, which in this chord would be, of course, the G sharp. And we play a minor arpeggio based on that. Okay, but we can also start a triad on the 3rd of the chord, meaning the 2nd note. Then we would make it a major. And almost all of the notes are the same, right? So if the band and the bass and the rhythm guitars are playing the G sharp, then the G sharp is a part of the sound, even if we don't play it up top on the melody. So that is already covered. The next note is this, that's in, right? And this, they're all in the G sharp. However, this one, the 5 of the B major triad, is not in the G sharp. But what it does is it extends the chord up into a G minor 7. Okay? That's why it works, because it's still very much in. Now, why would you want to do that? One of the reasons is because you get to use different shapes. That's a shape that Marty likes to use a lot. Now, if we did that with the G sharp minor, it would look like this. Right? It's a lot different to play. Now, I'm not saying that that's the reason why we're doing it, but I'm saying that it helps a lot to have a nicer shape to use over there. So that's one reason. The other reason is because triads have a specific sound to them. Right? If I play a B major arpeggio, it's gonna sound a lot different than if I play a G sharp minor 7 arpeggio. Okay, so here's the B. Now here's if I play a G sharp minor 7 arpeggio. I'm not saying that those would be the exact phrase of the notes, but it's a different sound, a very different sound, right? And in a lot of Marty's music, the arpeggios usually are pretty triad-based things. So that's another reason why there might be a B major arpeggio. Anyway, next up we have C sharp, so it's just a C sharp arpeggio. Then we get an A sharp 7, and we get something different. So this is the whole phrase. Now this is where I dare to talk a little bit about scales. Maybe you've noticed that we haven't talked all that much about scales, because that's not a huge part of Marty's process, really, and it doesn't seem to be the way he thinks. But I'm gonna give a bit of a scale thing here, okay? So all of this fits nicely, and we're landing on the 5 of a D sharp minor again. Now the scale we're using here, to the D sharp, it would be called harmonic minor, because the harmony is pulling us to the D sharp minor, right? That's where the name comes from, harmonic minor, because the harmony is really pulling us
to the D sharp minor. So that scale will be called the D sharp harmonic minor. If you want to look at it from the point of view of the A sharp 7, then it will be called a mode of the harmonic minor, the 5th mode of harmonic minor, which is called a Phrygian dominant. Okay, I know that that's a lot, and you've probably heard those names before, but that's where they come from originally. Harmonic minor means that the harmony is pulling us. So all these notes fit right in with harmonic minor, fit right in with the A sharp 7, and fit right in with the chord that's coming, which is a D sharp minor. Next up is this. We're hitting the 5 of the D sharp and then the octave. So functionally, they're the same note. And we're going down chromatically. And this is what we're landing on, which to the G sharp minor is the 3rd. So we got the main tones are here and they're the chord tones. Now the stuff in between is just chromatics, to be honest. They don't make a whole lot of sense again. This is a great use of just chromatics and having that be a way to extend a phrase. Because the idea is to have, and we just need stuff in between. So I'm sorry to disappoint you, but there isn't a magical scale in what this is. Next up, we're here. We're hitting some octaves here, so these two are the same notes. And we just slide it up from here. So you could say that this all fits G sharp minor really nicely, if the main tones are kind of here. And next, just a few octaves, which are all diatonic. Next up is a C sharp major, so we have this arpeggio. Next, a D7, and we're hitting the 3rd of the chord. And here's what we're approaching. This is the E minor, and we're just coming at it from notes that fit that. They fit the G major, which is the new key. Again, a chord tone, a 5 of the C, a 5 of the G, a 5 of the D, a 1 of the B. This is a very minor 7 arpeggio shape. All of that fits E minor nicely. And the last note is a 3rd of the A. And this fits the A minor, but also is a flat 7 to the B minor. Next up. This is all, again, E minor, G major, pentatonic kind of thing. Then a little scalar thing.
It's all right in the G major, and we're landing on the 3rd of E minor. Then here is this. No, the first chord is a C. This looks very much like an E minor arpeggio. With some extensions and some approach notes. So here would be the shape itself. We're just using all of these. And then sliding a little bit down. It's kind of the same thing that was going on in the chord before, that we're starting an arpeggio from the 3rd. Meaning that when we have a C, we can always have an E minor arpeggio over it. And then we can just change the E minor into an E major. And here we have a little bit of added stuff into the major shape. So first it goes. All of that is very much in. And then we just take the 9. And go to the flat 7. And then we just chromatically go down. Here. And here we have the same phrase as before. Again, we're hitting the 4 minor, the C minor. The shape looks a little different. But the notes that we're hitting are pretty much the same. There's the same 6 on top, and the chromatic approaches again on the top part. This is all a very pentatonic thing again. And then we are in the outro. So very pentatonic. So it's a very major pentatonic ending. It's just that all the harmonic weirdness that happens, you know, the E flat major and the shift to the G minor, they all happen when the G note is ringing. So it's kind of the most comfortable note of the melody is the 1, and that's when all the harmonic weirdness happens. So the melody kind of keeps the ear grounded in a way, if that makes sense. Okay, well, that was it. I told you it was gonna be a long video, maybe a bit too long, I don't know. But it was fun, right? I hope it was. And I hope I managed to clarify things for you. If you have any questions or disagreements or whatever, feel free to leave a comment. But if you noticed, we didn't talk all that much about scales. To me, it seems like Marty doesn't really think like that. A lot of times, us guitar players try to look for answers in scales, but a lot of times that's not the answer. Sometimes you have to change the way you think about stuff. And that's one of the reasons I divided this into 3 ways of thinking about the melody.
A lot of Marty's music is in the second way of finding the chord tones. And a lot of what Marty does is he's very aware of what different notes feel like to a specific chord. So I hope this encourages you to maybe try and find new ways to think about things. Thank you very much for staying here. If you made it all the way to the end over here, I'm very impressed. And I hope you learned something. If you want to support what I do, you can find me on Patreon. Thank you very much for being here, and we're just getting started. See you again.